This is Stare Down the Bull. I'm your host, Susan Hunt. Around here, we tackle the hard stuff: how to lead with clarity, leveraging AI, and turn strategy into real results. My guest today brings a powerful perspective on how to do exactly that. Let's dive in. I'm thrilled to welcome Rick Mack, an extraordinary Chief Communication and Marketing Officer, long-term friend, and trusted collaborator. Rick works with companies of all sizes, from industry giants to scrappy startups. And I've had the privilege of teaming up with him at Nuance, Surge Growth Consulting, and in some high-stake projects. One standout memory, our trip to Capitol Hill, where we had to communicate the story of innovation to government leaders about adding voice biometrics to the immigration bill, which is still in limbo, by the way. No matter the stakes, Rick remains calm, strategic, and razor-focused. Today, I can't wait to hear his insights on communication and leadership under pressure. Welcome, Rick.
Susan, thank you. Thrilled to be here. Quite the intro. Appreciate it.
Thank you. So glad to have you. Let's start with your journey. How did you find your way into becoming a Chief Communication and Marketing Officer?
Wish I had a big origin story for you, but it really started back in college. I went to school in New England, having grown up in Baltimore, and they had an unofficial J term where they had internships with prior alumni where you could kind of get an introduction over the course of a couple of weeks into an industry, into a field. And as you might imagine, not a lot of New England people down in the Baltimore area. There was only one that was available. It was with a PR firm. So spent a few weeks there writing cut lines for photography, writing some basic press releases, and found that I liked it. It was a lot of fun. There was something gratifying, satisfying in seeing your work appear in magazines. I was working with Black & Decker in their power tool division, and use that first foray into this to then parlay that into some additional internships in the Boston area with one of the world's largest PR firms, then ultimately turned it into a career where I started off on the communications side of things with public relations and different agencies, and then eventually moved into the corporate world, became a client myself, working with people like RSA Security, Nuance, Cerence, and a number of others, and ultimately landed in a consulting and advisory practice today.
That's an awesome story. You spent a lot of time at Nuance. We worked together quite a bit there. How did you end up at Nuance?
Was kind of in between. It was the days of the internet and the big boom and then the big fall, and was looking for something different, and really found a really good leadership team and management team in Nuance. At the time, it was Scansoft. It was an imaging company, and within just a couple of weeks of joining, we went on a remarkable tear where we went from 50 million in revenue all the way to close to 2 billion in total revenue. As you well know, having been a part of that. But it was a leadership team. It had a vision of growing the company. We moved from just imaging into voice, and really watching that company grow with acquisitions and new product announcements, new industries, new markets. It was just constantly evolving type of place. But it was just remarkable from a communications and marketing perspective.
Yeah, you were the key player when it came to outbound comms in that company. So
it was a lot, 100 acquisitions, and we found ourselves in all kinds of different situations, as you well know. You mentioned some of the government work, but just really seeing that business blossom. The speech and AI industry back in the 90s was kind of a high flyer. It didn't really necessarily meet its expectations. And Scansoft and Nuance and this team really came in and redefined an entire industry and really got us to where we are today when you think about conversational AI and other ways that we interact with each other and with computers and technology, devices, cars, what have you.
I mean, I know that you did this a lot on Capitol Hill. I only went with you one time or on, for a few occasions to talk about getting voice biometrics in the immigration bill, which still has never happened. We thought that voice biometrics made a lot of sense at the time. We knew who was coming into the country, but they didn't really know if the people that said they were leaving were the actual people that were leaving at the time. And we thought voice biometrics would make a lot of sense in that realm. So you and I spent a good amount of time talking to leadership on Capitol Hill. And I thought it was fun and also horrifying all at the same time. It was complex because we were talking to non-tech people about some of the most technical type of technologies you could possibly talk about. Could you give me a few insights on that particular time and also other times that you spent on Capitol Hill working towards getting acceptance of different types of texts?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think you hit the nail on the head with complexity of tech. And here you are talking to a cohort that really knows nothing about the technology. They're legislators, and they don't understand the ins and outs of this and ultimately kind of how it would manifest itself in any type of legislation or protocols that might be implemented. So we did the VB work for the immigration bill. We did a lot of work around dictation and medical records for EHRs. We did distracted driving and voice control that is now pervasive across automotive. But there was one kind of unifying factor in all of that, and that was really kind of getting to the why it matters. So how do you get through the complexity of the technology and help somebody understand the why it's important and what the outcome and the value is going to be? For anybody that's been around Capitol Hill, and we certainly did this around the VB voice biometrics. Um, you always have to start with the ask. So you go into any type of legislative meeting and everybody tells you you need to have the ask. What are you asking for? What are you asking that policymaker, that legislator, what are you asking them to do or to enact? But then just as quickly, you need that follow as to the why. What's the outcome and what's the value that's going to be driven? And that was kind of in the midpoint of my career, where up until then, most of the people that I was talking to, communicating with, marketing to, were people that were kind of in our sphere of influence. They were already customers, they were investors that knew the space, that knew the tech. And here we were trying to introduce this new technology that hadn't really made it into the mainstream yet in the early 2000s and 2010s. And how do you explain, one, what it is that we're asking them to do, but then two, why does it matter? And that was kind of really kind of reshaped my view on marketing and communications in general, was just the importance of the why, the purpose, the value, the outcome, more than the product or the feature or the capability we're ultimately bringing to market. So it was a fascinating time. We weren't successful on the VB front, but we certainly were on distracted driving, with making sure that mobile phones weren't going to be banned. We did a lot of work around electronic medical records and voice dictation and making sure patient notes are preserved. So just an unbelievable experience that we went through there.
Yeah. I've talked to a couple of people in DC over the last 4 weeks about coming on a show, and they're telling me that this problem has exasperated considerably with AI and people understanding AI, and the technology is moving so much faster than the
Mhm.
legislation, and they're trying to figure out how to solve that problem at this time, and it's a very big problem. I do think that the younger generation coming into Congress and into the Senate is going to understand the technology a little bit better than some of the people that have been around for a really long time that haven't, grown up with it. But yeah, this is like a very, very big concern of a lot of legislators right now.
Yeah, it's a big concern, but it's also a huge opportunity when you look
Yes.
at what can it do to you? How can it help us be better? And it's again, it's not so much the what, but it's the why. So, what is the benefit? What is the value? What is the outcome that ultimately AI, any type of technology, can bring to society, to business, to consumers, to people, to healthcare, whatever it might be? Huge
Yeah.
opportunity there if done properly.
Yeah. Let's pivot a little bit to the CEOs because I know that you work with a lot of CEOs, and you've worked with them in some really critical um, situations when words truly mattered. How did you help some of these leaders remain calm and clear when everything was kind of on the line? And if you want to give an example of something that may have happened with one of your companies where communication was super super important and the way that things were put out was really important. I know you had at least a few of them.
Just a couple over the years for sure. Yeah, like I said, Nuance was a very aggressive, high growth company. We went from 50 million in revenue. We went from a couple hundred employees to 10,000 employees in a matter of years, close to a decade, I guess. So we certainly saw a lot there. When it comes to any type of communications in a high pressure situation, it's just a bit of calmness. Trust the process, trust your instincts, know where you've been, and even if you don't feel it on the inside, make sure that you're projecting a degree of confidence on the outside. and just helping get CEOs, other executives, teams through the process where you're focusing on what matters most. What is the outcome going to be? Keeping it simple. Our prior boss at Nuance, he was fond of saying, in the absence of anything else, always start with the truth. And if you can start there and then you can build from that with a methodical process, really taking care and consideration into who your audience is and what that message is, you're ultimately going to be successful with it. And it's that degree of preparation and methodology combined with just an inner confidence that you're doing the right thing based on your training and your preparation. You've got the recipe for success.
You're actually really great at crisis management. You're one of the only people that I think I could say I've never seen you freak out. In all the years that I've known you, I literally don't know anybody else that I could say that about. Never once did you freak out.
Yeah. My family says I'm unemotional in that respect. So maybe that parlays itself into business as well.
Yeah, well, any CEO would be lucky to have you involved in anything that they were doing, especially when it comes to crisis management, crisis communications. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's fun. It can be exhilarating. It can be nerve-wracking, of course. And the name of this podcast is Stare Down the Bull. And certainly have had those number of instances over the years. You and I have been through some of them, and certainly at Nuance. There was one in particular, it was back in 2017. I'll never forget the day. It was last day of school and what should have been a joyous day. Nuance got, and I forget if you were there or not at the time.
No, I
Um,
was gone at that
but
point.
yeah, but Nuance had gotten hit with a malware attack. It was
Yeah.
a foreign state that had launched malware into a foreign banking system that hopped out of that banking system and affected dozens of global companies.
I remember it.
And it brought Nuance and a number of other businesses to its knees, to the point where it was largely around the healthcare business. And people were having difficulty getting access to medical records because we were the front end to more than half of every medical record that was being dictated and entered into an EMR. So I remember vividly sitting around a boardroom table that morning, with no computers, no phones, anything that was cloud based or connected, gone. And how do we build trust? How do we instill confidence? How do we communicate out to our teams? We sat around a boardroom with phones in red solo cups because we had no speaker phones, and you got a long board table. So you need to amplify. It was
Wow.
crazy. And then, but again, going back to that comment on being prepared, being methodical, working through the different audiences, starting with the truth, and then building a communications program around it. It was a 6 month process. It was a few really, really tough weeks, to the point where we had people sleeping on floors. We had conference rooms turned into nap rooms. We had daycare in the cafeteria, but all of that with this idea toward one, fixing the problem, and then two, making sure that we're communicating it out to our customers, to our employees, to our investors, and ultimately the world, because so much of the world depended on this technology for medical information. It was an unbelievable experience, one that I hope I never have to go through again. But I can look
Yeah.
back on it fondly at the same time and say, you know what, we were really successful there. We were really successful because we kept our customers, we kept our partners. We didn't get crushed in the stock market. And all of that was because we were very forthright, very forthcoming, and also very prepared in how we were going out to the market and to all of those different audiences as we worked through it. So that was a big stare down the bull opportunity.
Yeah. That was a
That
legitimate corporate stare down the bull opportunity that you guys handled beautifully and Nuance recovered from
absolutely
with very little impact. I mean, I know it must have been incredibly hard work
was
but you guys
hard
did a
work for
great
six
job.
months. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then
I
just several
vaguely
years later, sold to Microsoft for a
yeah.
very pretty penny
Yeah.
because a
Yeah.
lot of that business had been preserved.
Yeah. And that was I mean, that was probably the biggest stare down the bull at Nuance, but there were many others as well. So that
There were
was
many others. I mean, anytime you go into an acquisition and you have the emotions on both sides of the business, either being the acquirer or the acquiree, and making sure that you're hitting all of those different touch points and all of those different people. Uh, uh, if you are being acquired, obviously you've got that very emotional aspect, that continuity aspect that you need to make sure you go down. And having done 100 of them, 100 plus over my tenure at the company, was pretty remarkable. Down to where you get a playbook, but every one of them is different. And whether you're buying somebody for $1 billion or for $2 million, that same playbook and that same communications methodology is absolutely critical for the success of the program. And then we've had everything else with executive departures and activism, and then all the fun stuff too, in watching the company grow around our product launches and new industries, in the growth metrics and the investor communications. It was a lot of staring down a lot of bulls over my tenure
Yeah.
there for sure.
The breadth of comms and marketing that you've experienced and created in your career is astounding. Honestly, it really is. Most people don't do that in 100 lives. 100 acquisitions. That's
It
a
was
lot
a
of
petri dish
acquisitions.
of communications and marketing for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Um, from your perspective, what separates companies that communicate with confidence from those that simply react?
Confidence is key, and oftentimes I think confidence stems from authenticity. And if you find companies that can be authentic in their communications and what they're trying to communicate, you're going to have a much better outcome and a much higher degree of success. Um, and it kind of all goes back again to that why. Why are we doing something? Why are we asking somebody to buy a product, to invest in the company, to come join us for work, and really making sure that you've got that authentic story and baseline and foundation. Because if you've got that, that's all you need then from which to build. And that becomes critical across any audience, across anything that you might be selling. Because look, at the end of the day, every company is selling something. It could be selling its stock, it could be selling a product, a market, a place of employment, a board seat, anything along those lines. But if you're able to communicate and explain the why that somebody would want to buy whatever it is that you're selling, and be able to cross those, what are you selling and to whom, and make sure you're drawing the parallels in the stories, you'll be successful in it. And it's the companies that try to spin things too much or lose a little bit of that authenticity, where you can kind of see through it pretty quickly. It's a very thin veneer that once you get below the layers, below the surface, there's not a lot there. And at the end of the day, that's going to come back and bite you.
One of the things that I see in my consulting business, and you probably do too, is younger companies make the mistake of not investing in comms early on, in marketing early on. They just kind of wing it until it's not too late, but they have created kind of like this hybrid, not clear story, and then they have to redo all of it. Do you have any advice for, especially in the AI space, where these guys are actually getting a reasonable amount of money, a reasonable amount of investment? They have to kind of break out of this overall gang of AI companies to be seen, in my opinion. Do you have any advice for those founders that are kind of starting up of when they should bring in somebody like you and the value of doing that earlier rather than, 2 years into the process?
No, absolutely. It's important for startups, but quite frankly, it's important for any business. And I'm working with a handful of companies right now, from a $1 billion software company all the way down to some of these pre-revenue startups. In building that solid foundation and a really clear story, a really clear narrative for the business, is absolutely critical. And in one project right now, I've said it over and over and over again. This isn't a pitch deck. This isn't a long corporate pitch deck. This isn't a long product deck. This is a very simple story that everybody should be able to tell, no matter to whom you're telling it. Um, what is it that you're offering? What need is it serving? How's it different? And then what is the value that you're able to drive? And if you can do that very succinctly in 90 seconds or less, and you can come in and you can build that, that's going to serve you well for a long, long time. It's getting to that purpose, getting to that why behind a business. And that's something, if you do it right, it's an excavation. It's not a bunch of marketing people in a room around a whiteboard to say, how are we going to position this? But if you really get to your true inner self and your core belief and your core value that you bring to whomever you're trying to bring it to, you're going to be successful on that front. I think back to Nuance, and we went through a project there for purpose. And a lot of time, a lot of money spent on this, interviews up and down across the organization to get to that real hardcore why we are where we are and we do what we do. And after I left Nuance, my daughter actually had an internship there sometime later, and I was thrilled to see that 5 years after the fact, she got a piece of collateral, which was the exact same one that the team had built 5 years prior that had not changed. And when you can get to that level of specificity and authenticity in a message, you know you've done something right because you've gotten to the core. It's authentic. It is who you are. And for any startup, for any business out there, getting to that as quickly as possible is huge. And if you're able to build on that, then everything else kind of comes along with the process.
I think one of the unfair things that new CEOs are kind of told by venture capitalists, and I know this because I spoke to a venture capitalist last week, and he told me about this dirty little secret, which is actually very obvious but unspoken most of the time, is that they'll convince you that they're going to help you with messaging and branding and marketing and communication and sales. But in reality, they very early on decide who are going to be the winners that they're investing in and who they're going to be the losers that they're investing in. And the winners are the top 2%. And those are the ones that they actually spend the time with, which makes it really difficult for a new founder to get the kind of attention that they need. So don't wait. Hire people that actually know what they're doing right from the beginning. If you have a little bit of money, it doesn't cost a lot for a fractional person to help you do these things. Otherwise, you're going to realize in 2 years that you weren't really getting the support that you needed from your VC, and you've got to start then. So I think that that's kind of fair messaging to lay out, and wouldn't be saying it if it wasn't stray from a venture capitalist's mouth. But it's also obvious from a business perspective. Of course, they're going to invest in the open AIs, which they know are going to be,
Right.
multi-billion, maybe even $1 trillion success for them, rather than the guy that's going to do, $10 million a year in
Yeah.
sales.
And hey, $10 million is nothing
Nothing to
to put
sneeze about.
aside.
There's still a business
Nothing at
there.
all.
You just have
And
to
there's an
build your own team.
opportunity. Build the
Yeah.
right team, build the right story, focus on what matters most to you in the business, and let the rest take care of itself.
Yeah. Once you
And
have
getting
an idea of the product, don't wait. Hire the
exact,
professionals to help
yeah,
you.
amen to that.
Looking ahead, how do you see the role of a CCMO evolving as AI, speed, and transparency reshape how companies communicate with the world?
I think the biggest aspect of, and it's funny because just a couple of years ago, I saw a lot of clients that were hesitant to embrace AI. There was this view of power to our people. Our core value prop as an agency, as a marketing company, as a marketing team really comes from deep experience, domain expertise in a particular industry. And just over the course of the last year, I've seen a sea change in that because I think AI changes the dynamics. It shifts the value. It shifts the value from execution and more into strategy. And anybody or any company that is able to embrace it to help with the mundane or to help with the execution and the tactics to allow you to focus more on the strategy, the trust, that human intervention is going to be the right blend of things. So you absolutely have to invest in it. You have to embrace it, but you have to find the right ways to use it. So you no longer write press releases or you no longer deliver campaigns. You're driving insights, you're driving growth. So don't focus on the tactics, focus more on the strategy. And that's where the value is going to come in. How do you harness AI for the betterment of the communications and the betterment of the marketing programs? Because it ain't going away.
Yeah.
So you better find a way to use it. And if you're able to then show your value on top of it, where you become the strategist and the driver of it, then you'll ultimately be successful. My daughter's new in marketing, and my son is kind of going through it in music. And the message has been very similar. It's here to stay. It's not going to go away. So find ways to use it, and there's a time and a place for it. And if you're able to do that, you're ultimately going to be successful in the long run.
Just one final question. As a personal mantra or mindset helps you stare down the bull, what is your mantra that helps you stare down the bull in your own life?
I'd go back to actually very simply, I'll start with that and then I'll tell you the why. Control the controllable. Kind of goes back to my non emotive side of things, but focus on things that you can control. And I've kind of always practiced that where I don't get really excited or really worked up about things kind of on the periphery, but really look at what's in front of you. And it really came home for me with my daughter in a lacrosse coach when she was playing competitive lacrosse, and the coach had sent her a text. It's kind of a pep talk prior to a big tryout and a big practice, and said, above all else, just control the controllables. You're not going to be able to control what the other girls are doing. You're not going to be able to control what the girls think, but just focus on yourself, the things that you can control yourself. And I thought that was just very prophetic,
Yes.
and that was something then that I've always kind of practiced, but I had never really heard it articulated in that way. And as I go across everything, I just try not to get excited about all the stuff on the sides, but really just stay focused. That works for us from a personal side, from a professional side, and certainly when you're looking at communications and marketing, 100%. Focus on really what matters, that why, that authenticity, and do so with confidence. And then the rest will take care of itself. And if you're able to do that, you're on the right path for sure.
That's really great advice, Rick. I love that.
Yeah.
Control the controllable.
I wish I
Really
could take
smart.
credit for it,
It's great. I
but I'll
love
give it to
that.
Katie instead.
Well, listen, our time is up, but thank you so much for joining Stare Down the Bull. And if you guys want to hit us up on LinkedIn, Rick and I are both available. If you have any questions, needs, want to continue the conversation, we're available to do so. So thanks again, Rick.
Susan, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Stare Down the Bull. If today's conversation sparked new ideas, share it with a colleague and keep the momentum going. The future belongs to leaders who act, so subscribe and join us again next week.